The strait that can crash the world economy, why the global economy still rises and falls with the security of its energy system, the geography of inflation. Wars are often described in geographic terms: front lines, borders, strategic choke points. Yet their economic consequences are rarely confined to the battlefield. A conflict that erupts thousands of kilometers away can appear, with disarming speed, in places that seem far removed from geopolitics: a petrol station in Houston, an airline ticket in Frankfurt, a grocery bill in Hanoi. The confrontation with Iran is a reminder of this uncomfortable truth. Though the missiles and drones may fly over the waters of the Persian Gulf, the war's economic shockwaves are global. They travel through a far more integrated network than any battlefield logistics chain, the world's energy system. Modern economies run on energy in the way 19th-century empires ran on coal. Every industrial process, transport network and digital infrastructure depends on the steady flow of fuel. Interrupt that flow, even briefly, and the consequences cascade outward through prices, supply chains, and financial markets. For decades, policymakers and investors have grown accustomed to a stable energy environment. Oil prices fluctuate, of course, but the physical infrastructure that underpins global supply, pipelines, shipping lanes, and refineries has proven resilient. Wars have come and gone without fundamentally severing the arteries of global energy trade. The Strait of Hormuz, however, remains the system's most delicate pressure point, the world's most important choke point. At its narrowest, the Strait of Hormuz is barely 30 miles wide. It is a thin ribbon of water separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula, an unassuming geographical feature whose economic importance far exceeds its size. Through this narrow passage 1/5 of the world's traded oil flows. Tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates must pass through it on their way to refineries in Asia, Europe, and North America. Liquefied natural gas shipments, particularly from Qatar, also rely heavily on this corridor. In the physical geography of energy, Hormuz is less a route than a valve. Turn it off and the global system begins to choke. Energy markets understand this vulnerability instinctively. When tensions rise in the region, oil traders do not wait for tankers to stop moving before reacting. They price in the possibility that they might. The mere threat of disruption can send prices surging. During the latest escalation with Iran, benchmark crude prices briefly climbed above $100 per barrel. The spike was driven not by an immediate shortage but by fear that shipping lanes might close, that insurance costs would skyrocket, or that naval confrontations could delay cargoes. In energy markets, perception often precedes reality. The fragility of energy logistics: unlike many commodities, energy cannot be replaced overnight. Oil fields take years to develop, pipelines take years to build, and refineries operate within carefully calibrated supply chains. When disruptions occur, markets must scramble to adjust. If tankers are delayed in Hormuz, buyers cannot simply summon alternative supplies instantly. Producers must redirect shipments, storage facilities must absorb temporary surpluses or shortages, and insurance markets must reassess risk. Shipping companies face their own logistical puzzles. Tankers that normally transit the Gulf might suddenly need naval escorts. Some routes become too dangerous, forcing vessels to detour around longer paths that add days or weeks to delivery times. Insurance markets play a critical role here. Maritime insurers determine whether ships can safely operate in conflict zones. When war risks rise, insurance premiums surge, sometimes dramatically. In extreme cases, insurers may withdraw coverage entirely, effectively halting commercial shipping even if the waterway remains technically open. These dynamics create a peculiar paradox. The global energy system can appear stable right up until the moment it isn't. A few incidents: an attack on a tanker, a missile strike near a port, a naval skirmish, can suddenly make an entire corridor commercially unviable. Markets know this, which is why they react so violently to even small signs of instability. America's shale illusion. In Washington, there is a temptation to believe that the United States has escaped the strategic vulnerabilities of Middle Eastern oil. The shale revolution has transformed America from a major importer into one of the world's largest producers. fields in Texas, North Dakota, and New Mexico now pump millions of barrels of oil per day. The United States exports crude and refined products across the globe, and its liquefied natural gas terminals ship cargoes to Europe and Asia. From a purely domestic perspective, America's dependence on Middle Eastern energy has indeed declined dramatically, yet the global oil market does not operate according to national self-sufficiency. It operates according to price. Oil is a fungible commodity. A disruption anywhere pushes prices higher everywhere. When global benchmarks rise, American drivers feel the impact immediately at petrol stations, regardless of whether the underlying barrel originated in Texas or Saudi Arabia. The same dynamic applies to airlines, trucking companies, and shipping firms. Fuel costs ripple through the entire transportation system, raising the price of everything from airline tickets to grocery deliveries. In this sense, energy independence is partly an illusion. The United States may produce vast quantities of oil, but it cannot insulate itself from global price shocks. Texas and the global energy stabilizer. If the United States cannot escape the global energy market, it can at least influence it. Nowhere is this more evident than in Texas. The state has become one of the central nodes of the global energy system. Its oil fields feed pipelines that run to Gulf Coast refineries, export terminals, and petrochemical complexes. When global supplies tighten, Texas producers often ramp up production. Additional barrels flow onto the world market, helping stabilize prices. This ability to respond quickly is one of the great advantages of shale production. Unlike conventional oil projects, which require years of development, shale wells can be drilled and brought online relatively quickly, yet even this flexibility has limits. Shale companies face labor shortages, supply constraints, and financial discipline imposed by investors who remember the industry's boom and bust cycles. In other words, Texas can help buffer global shocks, but it cannot eliminate them. The energy foundation of modern life, the centrality of energy to the global economy is often underestimated because it is so pervasive. Electricity flows invisibly through wires. Fuel moves quietly through pipelines and tanker routes, but remove energy from the system and modern civilization begins to unravel. Hospitals rely on electricity to power life-saving equipment. Factories require immense amounts of energy to run assembly lines and industrial machinery. Transportation networks, from container ships to delivery trucks, depend on fuel to move goods around the planet. Even sectors that appear unrelated to energy are deeply dependent on it. Agriculture is a striking example. Modern farming relies heavily on fertilizers derived from natural gas. Without these inputs, crop yields would drop dramatically, threatening global food supplies. Manufacturing is similarly energy-intensive. Steel and cement production require enormous heat. Plastics and countless chemical products originate from petroleum feedstocks. In short, energy is not merely another commodity. It is the foundation upon which the entire industrial economy rests, the inflation transmission mechanism. When energy prices spike, the effects spread quickly through the economy. The first victims are households. Petrol, heating, and electricity bills rise, consuming a larger share of family budgets. Consumers respond by cutting back on discretionary spending. Restaurants, travel, entertainment, businesses face a similar squeeze. Higher energy costs raise the price of production and transportation. Companies must decide whether to absorb those costs or pass them on to customers. In many cases they do both. Margins shrink while prices rise. This dynamic feeds directly on inflation statistics. Energy is a key component of consumer price indices, but its influence extends far beyond that category. Rising fuel costs push up the price of everything transported by truck, ship, or airplane, which is to say, everything. Central banks find themselves in a difficult position. Tightening monetary policy to combat inflation risks slow economic growth, yet ignoring energy-driven inflation risks allowing price pressures to become entrenched. The result is often a delicate balancing act between growth and stability. Policy tools and their limits. Governments are not entirely powerless in the face of energy shocks. Several policy tools exist to cushion the impact. One of the most visible is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Many countries maintain emergency stockpiles of crude oil that can be released during supply disruptions. By injecting additional barrels into the market, governments can temporarily ease price pressures. Coordinated releases among major economies can amplify this effect. Another tool is diplomatic coordination with energy producers. Governments may encourage friendly producers to increase output or redirect shipments to affected regions, yet these measures are fundamentally temporary. Strategic reserves are finite, and diplomatic pressure cannot conjure new oil fields overnight. Policymakers can delay, but they cannot eliminate the underlying vulnerability of the energy system. The persistence of fossil fuels. For years, discussions about energy security have been intertwined with debates about climate change, and the transition to renewable energy. Wind and solar power have grown rapidly in many countries. Electric vehicles are gaining market share. Governments are investing heavily in hydrogen technologies, battery storage, and smart grids, yet the global energy transition is progressing more slowly than many policymakers once hoped. Fossil fuels still account for 80% of global energy consumption. Renewable energy has expanded impressively, but much of that growth has been additive rather than substitutive. In other words, renewables are meeting rising demand rather than replacing hydrocarbons on scale. Part of the reason lies in the sheer scale of global energy consumption. Industrial economies require enormous quantities of reliable, dispatchable energy. Oil, natural gas, and coal still provide much of that reliability. As long as this remains true, geopolitical stability in energy-producing regions will remain a central pillar of economic security. The geopolitics of supply. Energy markets have always been intertwined with geopolitics. Oil fields, pipelines, and shipping routes often lie in regions marked by political tension. The Middle East occupies a particularly prominent place in this landscape. The region holds a large share of the world's proven oil reserves and plays a critical role in global supply. This concentration of resources creates strategic leverage. Countries that control major energy reserves can influence global markets, while countries that depend on imports must navigate the political risks associated with supply disruptions. For decades, Western powers have maintained a significant military presence in the Persian Gulf precisely because of these dynamics. Naval patrols, security partnerships, and regional alliances are not merely geopolitical theater. They are part of a broader effort to keep the global energy system functioning. Financial markets and energy risk. Energy shocks do not remain confined to physical markets. They quickly spread into financial markets as well. Oil prices influence everything from inflation expectations to currency valuations. Energy exporting countries often see their currencies strengthen when oil prices rise, while importing nations may face balance of payments pressures. Stock markets also respond quickly. Energy companies may benefit from higher prices, but airlines, shipping firms, and energy-intensive manufacturers often suffer. Bond markets react as well. Rising inflation expectations can push interest rates higher, affecting government borrowing costs and corporate financing. In other words, the energy system is deeply embedded within the global financial architecture. Supply chains under stress. Modern supply chains operate on principles of efficiency and speed. Components are shipped across continents, assembled in global manufacturing hubs, and delivered to consumers with remarkable precision. Energy disruptions threaten this delicate choreography. Higher fuel costs increase shipping expenses. Delays in tanker traffic can affect refinery operations, which in turn influence the availability of fuels used in transportation and industry. Manufacturers facing higher energy bills may slow production or raise prices. Logistics companies may pass on increased transportation costs. What begins as a geopolitical event can therefore ripple through the global economy in ways that are both subtle and profound. Lessons from past crises. History offers several examples of how energy disruptions can reshape the global economy. The oil shocks of the 1970s triggered severe inflation, economic stagnation, and a rethinking of energy policy across industrialized nations. Governments introduced fuel efficiency standards, invested in alternative energy, and built strategic reserves. Later crises, from the Gulf War to the Arab Spring, also demonstrated how geopolitical instability in energy-producing regions could send markets into turmoil. each episode reinforced the same lesson: energy security and economic stability are inseparable. The strategic imperative. The current confrontation with Iran therefore carries significance beyond its immediate military implications. It highlights the enduring fragility of the global energy system. Despite decades of technological progress and diversification, the world still relies heavily on a handful of critical shipping routes and production hubs. When those nodes come under threat, the entire system feels the strain. This reality has strategic implications for policymakers. Ensuring energy security requires not only domestic production but also the protection of international trade routes, diplomatic engagement with producers, and investment in resilient infrastructure. A system under stress. The global economy has spent decades building an intricate network powered by affordable energy. That network connects oil fields in the Gulf to refineries in Asia, pipelines in North America to manufacturing hubs in Europe, and shipping routes that span every ocean. It is an impressive system, but also a fragile one. The war with Iran is not merely a regional conflict. It is a stress test for the energy architecture that underpins global prosperity. Whether that architecture proves resilient will depend on many factors: military restraint in the Persian Gulf, the responsiveness of energy producers, the adaptability of supply chains, and the ability of policymakers to manage economic shocks. The unfinished transition. In the long term, many analysts hope that the global energy transition will reduce these vulnerabilities. A world powered primarily by renewable electricity might rely less on geographically concentrated resources and more on distributed energy generation. Yet even this vision faces practical constraints. Renewable systems require vast quantities of minerals, complex supply chains, and extensive grid infrastructure. Moreover, many sectors, aviation, heavy industry, maritime transport, still depend heavily on hydrocarbons. For the near future, oil and natural gas will remain central to the global economy. Stability as an economic asset. The deeper lesson of the Iran confrontation is therefore deceptively simple. Economic stability depends on geopolitical stability in key energy regions. This does not mean that every conflict will trigger a crisis. Markets are resilient, and the global energy system has shown remarkable adaptability over the decades. But the underlying risk never disappears. If the world depends heavily on hydrocarbons transported through vulnerable corridors, wars in those regions will reverberate far beyond their immediate geography. The price of disorder. For households and businesses, the consequences of energy disruptions are often felt in mundane ways: higher petrol prices, rising electricity bills, more expensive airline tickets. Yet these everyday costs reflect a deeper economic truth. Behind every liter of fuel and every kilowatt-hour of electricity lies a vast global system of extraction, transportation, and trade. That system depends on stability, political, military, and economic. When stability falters, the price of energy becomes a measure of geopolitical disorder. The strategic role of dependable producers. In moments of crisis, the importance of stable energy producers becomes particularly evident. Countries with reliable production capacity, whether in North America, the Gulf states, or elsewhere, serve as anchors for the global market. Their ability to maintain output and keep exports flowing helps prevent supply shocks from spiraling into full-blown crises. Investment in energy infrastructure, therefore, is not merely a commercial matter. It is also a strategic one. Pipelines, export terminals, and shipping fleets form part of the economic security architecture that supports global stability. A reminder from the Gulf. The conflict with Iran is a stark reminder that the global economy still rests on a foundation built decades ago: abundant hydrocarbons moving through a handful of critical routes. Technological innovation, renewable energy, and diversification may gradually reshape that foundation. But for now, the system remains vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. When tensions rise in the Strait of Hormuz, traders watch tanker traffic, policymakers monitor energy reserves, and consumers glance uneasily at petrol price boards. The battlefield may lie far away, but its economic echo is unmistakably close. And until the world builds a more resilient energy architecture, wars in distant waters will continue to reverberate through the global economy, one barrel, one tanker, and one price spike at a time.